Danielle Wood, welcome to 7:30.
Thanks for having me, Laura.
The economic historian Robert Skidelsky titled a volume of his biography of John Maynard Keynes, The Economist as Saviour, and economists certainly played a huge role in shaping the second half of the 20th century. Where did it all go wrong?
Look, I wouldn't agree that it all went wrong, Laura. We have enjoyed very long periods of prosperity and economic growth, which have lifted living standards for Australians and across the world. So I think economists have played a really important role in driving prosperity and growth in the second half of the 20th century. On the other hand, there are some valid criticisms, I think, of economists in the economics profession. We missed the global financial crisis, some of the rise of China. We haven't always paid enough attention to questions of inequality and economic mobility. So there are valid criticisms, but overall I think economics has been a force for good in the Australian economy over recent decades.
Well, the Productivity Commission now finds itself engaged in what you describe as the wicked problems, things like climate change, housing affordability and outcomes for First Nations Australians. Several of the wicked policy problems you mentioned are before the Senate this week, with housing being the first up and at the centre of the political debate. Is there a clear short-term remedy to the housing crisis available to policymakers?
I would like to say there is a clear short-term remedy, but I think unfortunately a lot of the problems have been slow burn and have been building over a long period. We have really welcomed the focus of both the Commonwealth and a number of the state governments on supply, and particularly the emphasis on reforming planning systems to build more houses close to jobs, close to amenities. I think what we're seeing is that planning, though, isn't the only challenge. We are now seeing challenges in the market around finance, obviously around input costs in the wake of COVID, and also, frankly, a productivity challenge. It's a sector that hasn't been good at building in innovation. It's got workforce challenges, and some of that is around competition with the state governments as they've significantly ramped up their local infrastructure spend. Some of that workforce has been pulled from residential construction. And also issues around the kind of regulatory burden. It is an area where you have local, state, federal government regulation overlapping. It can be a very costly and long process to comply with those regulatory requirements. So frankly, we think governments need to move on all of those fronts. It's not going to be a quick fix, unfortunately, but we didn't get into this problem quickly, so we're not going to get out of it quickly.
Well, as you say, a lot of really complex issues hitting supply in particular, but how heavily do you weight negative gearing and capital gains tax in the mix of solutions?
What I have said in the past is that, clearly there are some challenges on the demand side, but it's probably not the big issue. Supply first and foremost, I think, is the big constraint that we've seen and the big challenge for affordability.
Well, on the demand side, obviously, a significant factor is migration. How important is that in the current situation, and how much can you actually change it just by cutting back migration?
So migration clearly does contribute on the demand side. We're coming out of a very unusual period where we had borders closed and then reopened, so we had a sort of catch-up in migration levels. And so we need to make sure that our housing supply keeps up. And I think we can do that through those levers that I've just mentioned. You can have a healthy migration program and have housing supply that meets the needs of those people to find housing, but you need to make sure that you're looking at all the barriers to producing that supply.
In March this year, you said the way we do the green transition will have critical implications for productivity. Part of the Albanese government's answer to that is the Future Made in Australia legislation, which is now before the Senate. Will it work?
Look, I think the Albanese government would say that this is only one part of the arsenal that we have. We absolutely need to transform our economy to meet the net zero goals, to do our part in the global move to try and combat climate change. The Future Made in Australia is around supporting local industries, some of which may help with the green transition. We were very clear at the start of the conversation on that policy area that we needed to have strong guardrails, we needed to have a strong framework. We've proposed some changes, including making sure that all of the sector assessments go through this framework to make sure that they're subject to that kind of rigour, and making sure that those assessments are transparent so that the public can see what is going on. But certainly we think that's a really important step in securing the grounds for that program.
Well, there are still a lot of questions about that national interest framework. Everybody thinks it's a great idea, but there have been questions about whether it's been clarified enough in the legislation. The government has made some changes during its course through Parliament, including that a lot of these things be scrutinised by the Productivity Commission. Has that eased your earlier expressed concerns?
Yes, so certainly we've welcomed that additional scrutiny built in, and we think it's just really important that every decision that is made under this program be put through that framework, because it does provide the rigour and the confidence I think people need that we're getting good value for taxpayers' money.
And presumably that would include the two sort of outlier sort of parts of the legislation, which is the solar panels project and the quantum computing project. You'd be expecting that they would be sort of retrospectively subject to those sectoral plans?
We've certainly said that we think that all the spending under that program, including those pieces, should go through the sectoral plans and the national interest framework.
Danielle Wood, thanks so much for your time tonight.
Thank you for having me.